Hello, folks. Hope you're having a great day, and I hope your day is made even better by discussing large molecules. So, let's begin by talking about what makes macromolecules. You're made of the things you've eaten, right? So, the meals you've consumed have been broken down by your digestive system, absorbed into your bloodstream, and then sent to cells all around the body. The process of breaking down the foods you've eaten is called hydrolysis. The prefix hydro means water, and lyse means to split. So with hydrolysis, you use water to break the bonds between molecules. So here is a molecule of sucrose. This is like table sugar. And what happens is you add water and it splits this bond into the two constituent pieces of a sucrose molecule, a glucose ring and a fructose ring. So this happens repeatedly with the different foods you consume. Again, you start to digest them mechanically with your teeth. You digest them chemically with your saliva and the acids and enzymes in your stomach and intestine. And then when it's broken down through hydrolysis reactions, you absorb those nutrients into your bloodstream and then send them to your cells. Within your cells, your body performs dehydration synthesis reactions. So with hydrolysis, you use water, right, to split. So basically adds an H and an OH to keep those molecules separate. With the dehydration synthesis, you remove an H and an OH, and that takes out water. That's why it's referred to as dehydration. And then synthesis, because you are joining monomers together to make a polymer. So you're creating something. To synthesize means to create. So with the dehydration synthesis, you are creating a larger molecule. So you eat your meal, yum, 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 and then you recombine those materials into, skin, muscle, hair, glands, whatever the case may be. All right, now let's look at these categories of large molecules. The first we'll look at is carbs. Now, what are carbs made of? They're made of CHO, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. In terms of the main functions of carbohydrates, I think it's useful to think of them as being an energy source for us. So carbs provide energy in the form of glucose. We can break down glucose during cellular respiration to make ATP. Plants store energy as starch. They can link together many glucose monomers to make a starch polymer. So in this image here, you see a single ring of glucose that can be made, say, during photosynthesis, but then a plant will link them together. Well, what we do is then eat that starch. You eat your pasta, you eat your potatoes, whatever the case may be. And then with hydrolysis reactions, we cut up the starch molecules and release glucose into our bloodstream. Now, we can have excess sugar in our bodies, but what we do is rather than storing the sugar as starch, we store it as another molecule called glycogen. It's made of the same monomers. It's made of glucose, but we can store it as glycogen. So when you hear about people carb loading, when a person carb loads, they're consuming starches from plants, breaking it down into glucose, and then they rearrange that into the glycogen that is stored in the liver and in little sugar packets in the muscles around the body. So if you're a distance runner or an endurance athlete, what you're doing is storing that sugar as glycogen, and then when your body needs it, you can break that down and use it to make ATP. Another sort of ancillary use of carbs is in the cell walls of plants, that's cellulose. We can't digest that particularly well, so it sort of just passes through us. So that's getting your fiber. Now let's turn our attention to lipids. Now, what are lipids made of? They're made of CHO as well, but they have very little oxygen, very little O. So if we bump back for a second, carbs have CHO and quite a bit of O, quite a bit of oxygen, which means that the oxygens in carbohydrates can interact with water molecules. And lipids will behave, carbs will behave differently than lipids. Lipids, since they don't have much oxygen, don't dissolve in water, and they are immiscible. They don't mix with water. So that's why oils and fats will float on the surface of water. Now, we have lipids play out in different ways in our body. The way I think of lipids is I think of MEM. They act as membranes, energy, and chemical messengers. So just for lipids, remember their functions, MEM. In terms of membranes, they make up phospholipids. If we look, phospholipids arrange themselves in a bilayer. So you have a polar head on the outside and nonpolar tails on the inside. Those nonpolar tails, again, they're carbon hydrogen. They're nonpolar, so they arrange to avoid water. Let's see. they act as energy. We store energy in triglycerides. Triglycerides can be fats like what we have in animals, or they can be oils like what occur in plants. But what happens is there's a lot of energy in all those chemical bonds. So lipids store a tremendous amount of energy. I think a gram of lipids stores about like twice as much energy, almost twice as much energy as a gram of carbohydrates. So lipids are very effective, which makes sense for us. Plants can store energy as carbs because you can have like a potato in the ground, right? Plants aren't sending their carbs anywhere else. So, having less nutrient dense material like carbohydrates is fine. For us, we have to carry our energy around with us. So we pack as much energy into a gram of tissue as possible. So we carry our extra energy around as lipids or as fats. Now, interestingly, the parts of plants that are more mobile are seeds, right? A seed is a brand new organism plus a little bit of energy to get that going. So seeds are packed with oils, so they have much more energy-rich supplies than would the carbohydrate portion of the plant. So again, lipids are just packed with energy. And finally, messengers. Certain lipids can act as chemical messengers. And so those are hormones in the body. Those are hormones that can help switch genes on or off in your body and get it to react in certain ways. So again, for lipids, CHO with very little O, so they don't mix with water, and membranes, energy, and messengers. All right, proteins. Proteins, they are made of amino acids. That's abbreviated AA. So the monomer is an amino acid, and then you link them together, and it forms what's called a polypeptide. Poly meaning many. Peptide is referring to the types of bonds between the amino acids. So what I think of is like Lego blocks. There are only so many different types of Lego blocks, right? But you could put them together in all sorts of different combinations to make all sorts of different structures. Well, there are about 20 amino acids, and you can combine those amino acids in different ways to make all sorts of different proteins. And again, if you change the structure of something, you change what it's able to do. So we have different types of proteins that do different work. The first type of protein we'll discuss, fibrous proteins. They make up things like collagen. Collagen is 3 sort of ropes of polypeptides woven together. So it makes this really tough connective tissue, like the collagen that helps hold our skin in place. Globular proteins, they sort of fold up into blobs. That's what we see in a lot of enzymes that run chemical reactions. And enzymes are important because what enzymes do is make chemical reactions happen faster than they would have otherwise. They catalyze those reactions. So enzymes allow reactions to happen fast enough to support life. Now, let's bump back here. We'll talk about what proteins are made of. Carbs are CHO with a lot of O. Lipids are CHO with very little O. Proteins are made of CHONs, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, just like everything else. But they also have nitrogen and sulfur. That's why rotting eggs are stinky, because that sulfur gas gets released. But sulfur is a giveaway for a protein because you have these disulfide bridges that help hold the protein together. Now, if we look at the structure of proteins, we can look at it in sort of layers. The primary structure is just indicating the order of the amino acids. What order do you put together the building blocks? Secondary structures, when it starts to fold in on itself, it forms what are called pleated sheets and helices. Tertiary structure, that's functionally important because that's when your protein folds up and becomes something. It does an actual job. So your polypeptide folds up into a 3-dimensional structure and then it actually does something. That's the tertiary structure. And sometimes you can link together multiple polypeptides. So here in this image, they have the 4 different colored polypeptides. You link them together into something even bigger and it does something different. That's what happens with like hemoglobin that carries oxygen and carbon dioxide around the body. Finally, we look at nucleic acids. There are 2 broad categories of nucleic acids: DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA, ribonucleic acid. And there are a whole ton of different types of RNAs. But the basic idea is to provide instructions for building proteins and then have the machinery to actually do the construction. So if we think of it this way, lipids provide the membranes that create compartments in the body. Carbs provide the energy to run stuff. Proteins are the machinery that actually do the work. And then DNA is important because it provides the instructions for making the proteins. And then RNA actually does the assembly. Okay. So That's why the macromolecules matter, because when you put them together, you take these things that are non-living and you create something living like a cell. So again, lipids provide the membranes, proteins provide the machinery, nucleic acids provide the instructions and the materials for making the proteins, and then carbs provide the energy to do the work. When you put all those non-living components together, you make something living like us. You even see this playing out in the nutrition labels on packages of food. If you look at a nutrition label, it's basically listing some of the macromolecules. It tells you what the carbohydrate content of that food package is. It tells you what the lipid content is. It tells you what the protein content is. So you get information about macromolecules in food labels, because what happens is you consume these macromolecules in these foods, you break them down, and then you build them up into you. So as you sit here, you are an entirety built up of previous meals, things you've eaten over the course of your life. You've broken down and then rearranged into the components that make up you. So that ends the lecture video. What I'd like you to do is take just a few minutes to summarize the big ideas. What's this stuff about? How do you make these macromolecules? That's with hydrolysis and dehydration synthesis. What are the categories of macromolecules? And then how do they all work together? If you can come out of this with a good understanding of that, you're in great shape. All right. Thank you much. Have a good day.